Hi everyone, welcome to Make It Monday. This is the second part in our art journal class series. My name is Angie and I'm going to walk you through several watercolor techniques today that we're going to use to add color to the pages of our journal. I have a lot of fun things to show you, so let's get started. Alright, so let's get started. So the first thing is, of course, you need your art journal that you created with the watercolor pages. In your packets you will find some release paper. I did not have any release paper at home here, so I'm going to use wax paper. It's just something to protect the pages that you aren't working on. So you're going to need some water. I recommend 2 jars of water, one for clean water, one for dirty water. We're going to use some painter's tape. We're going to use a plastic palette, or if you don't have something like this, a plastic lid will work just fine. Make sure you have several paper towels, because that's handy to sop up water where you don't want it. I have several brushes here. This flatter brush I use to add water to my pages. And then these smaller brushes, I use this to add paint, and I use this to splatter with. And we'll go over all that. And then we're going to just use a basic watercolor set. This is just a praying watercolor set. Or if you don't have that, you can use water-based markers. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is kind of tape our book down and protect the pages that we aren't working on. I'm working on a hardboard. You can just tape it right to your table as long as it's not something. I'm working on the hardboard because I don't want to wreck my cutting mat here. So the first thing you're going to do is place wax paper or your release paper underneath one page, and what that's going to do, sandwich it in there, is protect the other pages that you're not working on. And so as you work through your book, you're going to keep doing that. So if you were working on your next set of pages, then you would put your release paper under that page, your release paper under that page, and then we're going to tape it down using some blue painter's tape. So we're just going to start with this first page for now. So I want to protect that from bleeding. So I like to, and there's a couple different ways you can do this. When Nicole did hers, she just taped it across the top. And that works too, and I'm going to do that on part of this. But I'm going to just put some blue painter's tape. Let me turn it this way so you guys can see this a little bit better. I'm going to take some blue painter's tape and put it right up against my page. I'm actually going to tape that right down to my board. And then I'm going to put my wax paper in there so it protects the rest of that. And I'll just use a piece at the top, but I'm going to put that other piece of wax paper in there. So I have my wax paper against that page, and I put it all the way up to the seam. And this is how Nicole did hers. She just took and taped the 2 pieces together right at the top, and then took another piece of tape. Get that off here. Slide that in, and then just taped it at the bottom. And I've kind of got that tape overlapping so it goes onto my hardboard. The other thing that's really helpful is either like a binder clip like this, or I like clothespins. And what that does is I can just take that clothespin and hook the bottom corner of my page, and that just kind of holds it flat. And as you go through the book, if you're doing a double page, I'll just grab my journal in here. So say you were working on this page, you would have your wax paper under here and your wax paper under here, and then a couple clothespins just to hold that open. And that's why we didn't put this flap on, because it does get in the way when you're trying to watercolor your pages. So that's what you would do for if you were doing a double page open. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is just a basic watercolor wash. All I'm going to do is just add some watercolor. How I prep my watercolors is I'll take a spray bottle and just add some water into the colors that I want to use. And then just let that sit there for a few minutes. It just makes the watercolors easier to use right off the bat. The other thing that's handy to have, and you can find these online just to print out, when you're going to choose colors for your watercolors, colors that are opposite each other on the color wheel make brown. If you want brown, that's fine, but if you mix yellow and purple together, it's going to blend into brown. The same thing with orange and blue, and the same thing with red and green. So when I pick colors, you can either think about sticking in rainbow order, which is Roy G. Biv, or you can pick colors that are next to each other. So purple, blue, and green are going to blend really nicely together. Red, orange, and yellow are going to blend nicely together. Red, blue, purple, and blue are going to blend nicely together. So you want to think about that as you're laying colors down. And here's the thing. If you end up with a page that you just think is god-awful ugly, cover it up with a piece of paper. So don't be alarmed that, oh, I have to be perfect at this. You do not. If you don't like your page, cover it up with a piece of paper and nobody will ever know what's underneath it. All right, so we're going to get started with this wash. The first thing I'm going to do, and this is where paper towels are really handy. Sometimes if you get too much water in this seam area, it bleeds into your other pages. And I had that happen, and it's not a big deal. I just covered it up with a piece of washi tape. But I like to wet my page first because I like the colors to bleed together. And it doesn't have to be a huge amount of water. In fact, for this type of thing, you don't want a huge amount of water. So I am just going to blend some water, and I'll just shift my clothespin here. Okay, there, so that I can get some water on that bottom. And I'm going to do just a simple rainbow wash. Now, the watercolors that I have in this palette are pretty pigmented, which is meaning the colors are pretty bright. So if you want a softer wash, you want to add color or water to your colors. So I'm going to start with some red. And I'm going to move this in because I don't know how well you can see that. And I'm going to soften that out with a little bit of water. And I should switch my brush here because I don't want this bigger brush to use. So I'm going to set that aside and I'm going to go to this smaller brush. So I'm just going to brush on, and my paper's dried a little bit, but just get your brush wet. I just want a real soft wash. A little bit more. There we go. And if it seems like your brush is too dry, just add some water to it. And then right where I want my colors to kind of blend together, I add quite a bit of water there because that will help with the blending. Okay, so next I'm going to go to some orange. I'm going to put that in my upper palette there and just add a little bit more water. And I'm going to, and don't be afraid to blend the colors together, you know, move them into each other because that makes a nice soft blend. And you can always go back to your first color and add some of that back in and see how that's making a nice red-orange there, right where they meet. up some more clean water and some yellow next. And the yellow I think I'm going to leave a little bit more vibrant, just because yellow is such a soft color. Add a little bit more water to that, especially on the edges. Alright, next one is green. This green is a real bright green, so I'm going to water this out just a little bit to lighten it up. My clothespin's in the way, so I'm just going to slide that down a little bit. Alright, looks like I lost a little bit of my yellow, so I'm going to pick up a little bit more yellow and put that where they transition a little bit. Alright, next I'm going to get some clean water and go to blue. And again, this is a really vibrant blue. So I'm going to add some water to it to just lighten it up. Blend that a little bit with just some, I have just plain water on my brush, and I'm just going to kind of work that back and forth a little bit just to blend those two colors together. Push my paper down there. And if you, I don't know if you can see this, I have just a little bit of water pooling there, and I don't want it to get too watery, so I'm just going to dab real lightly with my paper towel there. Alright, and the last color is going to be a purple. And again, this is pretty vibrant, so I'm going to water it out a little bit just to lighten it up. I'm going to switch this up to the top here. I'll just hold it with my finger. And I'm going to add this kind of purpley pink here. Come back and add just a little bit more blue in between. And with watercolor, really let the water do the work. The water will blend it. And I want this just a little bit darker than I had it. Line going there, so I'm just going to smooth that out a little bit. And a little bit on these edges are showing white, which is not any big deal. I'm just going to blend those off to the edge. Okay, so there's a basic watercolor wash. So there's a couple things you can do. You can let it air dry, or if you're impatient, you can dry it with a hairdryer. I have just a little heat jewel here, so mind the noise, it's going to just get a little bit loud. I'm just going to dry this just a little bit so that I can show you a couple other techniques with this. I just need it to be just a tad bit drier. Okay, that's good enough for what I need. Okay, so then with a basic watercolor wash, there is a couple things, fun things that you can do with these. So the first thing is to splatter some clean water on there. And most watercolor paints are water reactive, of course. So I'm going to take my big brush and I'm just going to get some clean water on here, and I'm just going to tap it against my finger so that I splatter some water on there. Okay, I'm going to let that sit for just a second or two. And what that water is going to do, actually I'm going to add just a little bit more, is it's going to wick up the color underneath it. So we're going to let that sit for just a second, and I'm hoping that this isn't too light that you'll be able to see the effect. Okay, so then I'm going to take a clean dry paper towel. I'm going to place it right over the top, and I'm just going to press that down. And what we're doing is with the water, as you lift it up, it should leave some white marks on there. There, so you can see that we've got color on our paper towel. And let me pick this up a little bit. And you can see that it left some white marks in there. So that's a fun way to just take a basic watercolor wash and just add some texture. The other thing you can do with that is to add splatters. And your splatters can be splatters of watercolor paint. They can be splatters of white paint. And if you're going to use white paint, what I would suggest is to just take a little bit of acrylic paint. So we'll do that one. I got my white paint here. I'm just going to squeeze a little bit onto this. Let me get that started. Squeeze a little bit onto this palette. And I'm going to add some water to it because this is pretty thick stuff and I don't want it quite that thick. So I'm going to take actually my skinnier brush because I don't want huge white splatters. So I'm going to just take some water and just get it to like a good creamy consistency. You know, like a heavy cream. And then again, I'm going to take this is how I like to splatter. Some people splatter different ways, but this is what I found works best for me. I feel like I can control a little bit where the splatters are going. So I'm just getting some more water on my brush and just adding some more white splatters. Rinse this brush off and I'm going to set that aside. Okay, so now I've got some white splatters on there. If you want to do color splatters, you can pick up some watercolor on your brush, and I'm going to do this just pretty sparingly. So there's a little bit of purple splatter. Let's see, we'll do a little bit of yellow. Need a little bit more yellow in there. So I've got some. So with your leftover paint that's in your palette, I want this one. You can pick up. So I'm trying to kind of add the splatters in where the colors were in the rainbow. But if they go all over, that's okay. Like I said, there's no right or wrong way. This is more about kind of just playing and trying different things as you're creating your art journal. That's what it's about. Let's see, I want a little bit of blue. And I think I want just a tad bit more yellow in there. Okay, so I think we're going to call that page done. So with the splatters, I like to just let them air dry. It is just the easiest way to do it. So I'm going to take and move, I'm going to kind of peel this tape off and move this out of the way and set it to dry. Okay, so instead of trying to do another technique in the art journal, because it needs time to dry in between, I'm going to just set this aside and I'm going to just take some basic sheets of watercolor paper like this and show you the other techniques on that. So I'm going to just swing around the back side here and set that over on my table to dry. And the other techniques I'm just going to show you on straight watercolor paper. It'll just be faster and easier, otherwise we're going to have a very long video. Alright, so the next watercolor that we're going to do is I'm going to use the markers this time. And we are going to do watercolor with salt on it. And this is just ordinary salt that you find in your kitchen. This is just my salt shaker I pulled out of the cupboard. And I'm going to use the markers this time because I just want you to be able to see how this is going to work. So what I'm doing, I'm going to move this into the center because I'm just not sure how far my edges go out here. I am just taking some of each of these colors and scribbling it on my plastic palette. And they're going to act as watercolors then. All right, so I'm going to set that off to the left there. This is the art journal page that I did this salt technique on. So you're going to see the salt is going to give you a really mottled texture look. So again, the first thing I'm going to do is get my watercolor paper wet so that my colors blend. So I'm just putting a nice coat of water down. And I'm actually going to use this big brush to add the watercolor this time. There's my wet paper towel that I use to dry things on. If you don't have a big brush like this, I think you all got a foam brush in your last kit for the Mod Podge. You can use that to add the water. It'll work just fine. Alright, so I'm going to start with the blue at the top. And I'm just going to pick up some blue. Oh, I keep messing up my clean water. Alright, now we're going to go to the yellow. And you see how the water is kind of making that watercolor wick? That's the thing I love about watercolor, is the water does the work for you. So I've got my yellow in the center there, and I'm going to pick up some green on the bottom. So again, this is just your basic watercolor wash, and you don't have to do this back and forth this way. It can be at a diagonal, it can be splotches of color all over the page. You guys do you. Do what works for you, what you like. Because that's what this is all about, is just playing with different techniques and trying different things and expanding your ability of things that you can do. Okay, so why this is wet? Let's see, I need a piece of scratch paper to put this on so I don't end up with salt all over everything. Here's one. Alright, so I'm going to just take my salt shaker, and why this is wet, I'm just going to put some salt on there. And what happens is the salt absorbs the water and the paint. So you're going to take this, you're going to set it aside to dry. So I'm just going to flip around here, and I'm going to set that aside so it dries. And through the magic of camera, I did one earlier so that you could kind of see. So this one is completely dry. It kind of has this watermark in here because I didn't think it was wet enough, so I kind of sprayed a little water on there. And it kind of bled, but I think the effect is fun. So now, once it's dry, you're just going to take all that salt and just brush it off. But I love the effect that you get with this. It's such a fun, and you never know what you're going to get. And there's a gentleman that I follow in the craft world whose favorite saying is, you get what you get, you don't throw a fit. And I love that saying. Art is not perfect. And even though I'm very much a perfectionist, I am learning to just let it go. Alright, so that is watercolor with salt. So very fun technique. Again, any colors that you want to do this with. Less salt, more salt. This I put quite a bit of salt on here, but I love how that came out. So that is the watercolor with salt. All right, I'm going to get rid of this because it's got salt all over it. And we are going to move on to the next technique. So the next technique, okay, so I had some technical difficulties and my camera cut out on me. So I'm kind of segueing back in here, so I hope this all makes sense. So we just finished with the watercolor with salt technique, and now we are going to move on to the watercolor with plastic technique. So in your kit, you're going to find a piece of window plastic like this. Basically, for those of you who are my generation, this is overhead transparency. I don't know if you remember overhead transparencies from school or not, but that's basically what this is. It's just a clear film of plastic. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to paint with this clear film of plastic. And we're going to do this on a dry piece of watercolor paper. We're not going to add water to this first. So what we're going to do is we are going to take some marker and we're going to color it right on there. And then I'm going to pick up some water with my paintbrush here. And we're just going to get that paint wet. And then I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to press it right onto my watercolor paper. And I'm just going to smooth that out and push it around. I got a little bit of watercolor on the top half of that. And then we're going to pick that up. Now, in order to layer watercolor on top of each other, you need to dry it in between. So we're going to take, and a hairdryer will work just fine for this, we're going to dry this layer. So I'm going to work with yellow and blue on this particular one. And I want it to be mostly dry so I'm not seeing any puddle of wet. And it doesn't need to be toasty dry, but it does need to be mostly dry. Otherwise, if you don't dry it in between, all the colors just blend together and they won't sit on top of each other. So now I'm going to take blue and I'm going to add a little bit of that. Just a little bit of water, and we're going to take that and smush that right on there. And this is a very random thing, so this is not painting perfectly. It's not going to be, and I've got a few more drops, so I'm actually going to push those up there. It's not going to be perfect. It's going to be very random, very splattery, and that's what I like about this technique. A little bit of puddle right here yet that I need to clean up. All right. So I think I'm going to go back with a little bit more blue. And we're going to add a little bit more blue splotches in here. We'll add some more blue up in here. All right. And again, I'm going to take those extra spatters and just put them right down there. And again, we're going to dry it. Okay, I'm going to dry my plastic off again, and I'm going to come back in with more yellow because I want to add more yellow in a couple different spots. So I'm going to add a little bit more water to each of those. And I'm going to add this down here. And again, just smush it around. Again, a very random pattern. And again, we're going to dry that. More up top there. this way. Okay. And again, we're going to dry. Okay, now I kind of feel like I've lost a little bit of my blue. So I'm going to come back in. I'm going to dry my plastic off. I'm going to put some blue in a couple different random spots here. And I'm just going to add just a touch of water. I don't want too much. And that's okay that it did that, because it's just going to get smushed around anyway. Alright, so again we're going to smush our ink, our paint around. And then I still have some splatters on there, so I'm just going to touch these little round splatters in different spots here, just to give it a little bit more texture. And I think I'm going to dry that and call it done. And you can do more than one color on this. It doesn't have to be just one color or two colors. The only thing you have to remember is your color wheel, that you don't want to use opposite colors and if you end up getting too many colors, then it just kind of gets muddy looking. So I would stick to 2, 3 colors, 4 maybe, but I would stick probably to 2 or 3. So in my book, this is the page that I did using this technique. And I used a pink marker and a yellow marker and just kind of splotched them all over. But it's a really kind of fun random technique as far as the watercolor goes. So we are done with that one. And next we are going to move on to stamping with bubble wrap. Okay, so the next technique we're going to do is we're going to work with some bubble wrap. And we're going to do kind of a resist technique using bubble wrap and white paint. So here I have just a piece of bubble wrap that's small bubbles and a piece of bubble wrap that's big bubbles. And you can use either one. I'm going to just stamp this onto there with white paint. So I'm going to grab my brush here, and I have my white paint on my palette. And I am going to just pick up, I need a little bit of water. This is kind of dry. Get some water and just, you want it to be fairly thick, but not, so thick that the paint isn't moving. So I'm just going to brush this paint right on to the bubble wrap. And then I'm going to take it and I'm going to put it over my dry piece of watercolor paper, and I am going to just use this like a stamp and stamp it down, and then pick it up. And you can stamp more than once on there. I'm just going to try and do one of each here so that you can see what both of them will look like. And the big one gives you kind of a fun technique. So you're just going to, again, pick up some white paint and just paint that right onto the bubble wrap. And then I'm going to take that and I'm going to stamp that right onto the watercolor paper. And I'm going to pick that up. And then we're just going to set that aside, and it has to dry completely before you add any paint to it. So I am going to just flip that out of the way to dry. I'm going to clean up any of the wet white paint that I've got on my board, and I'm going to move my bubble wrap out of the way. So the beauty of video, I did one earlier. So the top half, and hopefully you can see this in the camera, the top half is where I stamped the small bubbles, and the bottom half is where I stamped the larger. And so now we're going to add some watercolor paint to this. I'm going to clean my brush out here. All right. So let's see. I think I'm going to use some of this blue. I need to water this down just a little bit. And I'm going to just drop color in. I'm just going to bring splotches of color. Whoops, and I just forgot something. We need to wet this paper first, otherwise the paint is just going to soak right into. So I'm going to just take my brush. Mistakes happen sometimes, you forget to do something. And so I am just going to kind of just go around that paint with my brush. And it's okay that it's, and then I'm going to kind of go over the tops just so that I can kind of keep that paint kind of in the area where I had started. I'm going to dab that off. Okay, so now my paint should move a little bit better. There's some water on there. Okay, so we've got some blue on there. I think I'm going to add a little bit of this light green. Oh, I need a little bit more water here. And I am going to add some kind of green in the middle here. And then I'm going to get a little bit more water on my brush. And again, if you're in your book, you want to be just a little bit careful about how much water you've got running places. I get a little carried away because I'm not working right in my book. But when I'm in my book, I try to be really careful about that. Let's see, we're going to do a little bit more blue on the edges of the green here. Green and purple don't always mix so well together. So I want to just kind of border that green with some blue just so that it doesn't make mud. And then I'm going to come in here with a little bit of this purple, which I want to lighten up a little bit here with some water. And then I'm just going to drop some purple in. And it's an overlap, but you can kind of see where the paint is resisting the watercolor. So I think we'll do some more purple here. And I think I'm going to bring in a little bit more blue kind of for this corner. And don't be afraid to pick up your book a little bit. Of course, you probably have it pretty well taped down, but like if you tape it to a board like this, then you can kind of tilt things. But I'm just gonna, that's edge is kind of hard there where I hadn't had water on the paper first, so I'm just gonna kind of coax it to move a little bit there. And again, I don't always like green with purple. It just does not. And maybe because this purple has quite a bit of pink in it, it doesn't seem to blend well together. It kind of makes it muddy. A little bit more blue, and then I think we're going to call this done. All right. Sometimes I just like to fuss and play. All right, we're going to call it done. All right, so if I tip this up, hopefully you can see it. See how the paint is resisting? So you get kind of a mottled texture in the background. I'm going to pull my book out so that you can see which page I did that on. Okay, so this is the page that I did that on, and my paint got kind of dark, so it kind of hid some of that white, but if you look at it, you can see, like, I used just big bubble wrap, and you can see some of the big circles from the bubble wrap in here, and then I also had some down here. So I actually stamped it here and I stamped it there, but I didn't stamp it over the whole thing. So you can do that. You can stamp it just on like a corner and a corner just to add a little bit of texture. So another fun, easy technique to do as kind of a resist pattern. So I'm going to set this one off to the side here and let that dry. Here's a couple other ones that I was kind of playing with the bubble wrap. So this one I used just small bubble wrap on and did it in reds, oranges, and green, red, oranges, and yellows. So you can kind of see. And then this one is just big bubble wrap. And my paint, you know, didn't totally cover it, so it got kind of splotchy, but I really like how that came out. So play with this stuff. It's It's so fun to come up with different things. Okay, so there's a couple things I want to talk about in my book as to how they got done that you can add to the background. One of them is this center page here with the circles. So in your kit, let's see if I can find mine here. In your kit, you will find a circle template like that. So how I did this is I did the wash in the background and I added a few splatters. And then I took this round stencil, and it's got white paint all over it, but that's another technique down a page, so I'll show you that as well. So I just took this and laid it down, and then took a marker and then just traced the circle. Then I took my watercolor brush, and I'm not going to actually watercolor in my book, but I took the watercolor brush and just kind of went over the line just to let the color bleed a little bit. So that's how that came about. And then also think about found objects around your house that you can use to add texture. So this is a toilet paper tube, and to get some of these circles in here, all I did was spread my white paint out, dab my cardboard tube in there, and then brought it to my paper and just stamped it. Same with this. This is the big painted circle that I used. And this one I actually took my brush and painted the paint right on this and then turned around and stamped it into my book. So think about different things around your house that you can use to add texture with. The other thing I did with the circle template is this page here, and hopefully you can see it in the background there. But I took my circle template and put it down and then just brushed white paint to get these white circles in the background of this page. So there's different things that you can do to add interest to your pages. On this last page, I actually took a piece of screening, which you'll have in your kit, and also stamped with that. So I will show you that. This is our page that we did with the salt. I'm going to take and stamp that with this screening. So you just want to, let me move this in here. You just want to dab your screening into your paint, enough to get it on there. And then you just want to push it down and just press. And hopefully I've got enough paint on here. And you get some really fun textures. I'll do it on the darker side down here too, because it'll probably show up a little bit better on the dark. So you're just going to take and again get some white paint on your screen, stamp with it, and pick it up. And it's just a really fun way to add some texture onto your pages. Just a little random interest, and they should never be perfect. I mean, you don't want a big square. You want just random areas that you're going to add this to. So hopefully you can see that down here. And you can also, even if you just covered your page in a piece of paper, similar to what I did on the back cover of mine. Let me make sure my hands are clean before I pick this up. So my back cover is just a piece of scrapbook paper, and I just took that and stamped it in the different areas just to add some texture and interest to that paper. So it doesn't even necessarily have to be over watercolor paper. You can do that over standard scrapbook paper just to add texture and interest to that. So think about different things around your house. The other thing I found was this. And this is actually a piece of gutter guard that I found at the lumberyard. So it came in a big sheet like this. And so I just cut it apart, and now I can use this as a stencil to add paint and different things through that onto my pages. So I'm going to just take a little bit of white paint, and this is just a piece of kitchen sponge. And I'm going to get my sponge just a tiny bit wet. It just makes it a little bit more malleable. And I'm just going to pick up some paint on my sponge and just sponge it right through this like a stencil. So think about different things that you might have in your house that you can use to add texture and interest to your pages. And like I said, it doesn't have to be anything fancy, you know, a piece of screening, a piece of gutter guard, you know, so then now I've got some nice white dots on there. So like I said, look around your house, see what you can find that you can use to add some stuff to your pages. So I want to also tell you about this. So you can also add tissue paper into your pages. And say watercolor is really not your thing. You know, you don't want to do watercolor on the back of all your pages. You don't have to do watercolor on the back of all your pages. So this is patterned tissue paper that I bought from the store. You know, I had some gift wrapping to do and I thought, oh, that's pretty paper. So all I did is I cut a piece of tissue paper a little bit bigger than what my page would have been, or my paper would have been. I put a layer of Mod Podge down on my piece of watercolor paper, and I laid the tissue paper on top, and then let it dry. You don't even have to put a layer of Mod Podge over the top of this at all. You're just going to lay it down and smooth it out and make sure it's, you know, attached to all the edges. And then once it's dry, turn it over, take your scissors, trim it off, and that can be your page. You could then turn around, I'm just going to flip this over, you could layer a piece of paper on there to journal. So there are a lot of different things that you can use. This is a piece of tissue paper that I stamped some writing on, and you'll find a couple of these in your kit as well. This one I happen to have stamped in a gray ink. I'll probably have some for you that I'll probably give you one stamped in gray and one stamped in black. So then you can take this, and again, I did that on this first page of my book. So let me get the string out of the way. So here I took I have a die cut that cuts this. So I just took a piece of release paper and cut that diamond shape out of it. Sponged through, used this just a stencil, just like I did with this, and sponged some white paint through there. Then I took the piece of tissue paper and I randomly tore this, put a layer of Mod Podge down, laid my piece of tissue paper down, and then put just a real light layer of Mod Podge over the top. This one, you know, if you're going to cover a whole page, you don't need a layer of Mod Podge over the top or anything. But if you're just putting a piece down, then you need to probably seal it over the top as well. So again, search around your house. You know, like I said, not everything has to be watercolored. I happen to love watercolor, but like this one, I wasn't crazy about the watercolor on there. So I took a piece of map page and just put down some Mod Podge and laid the map down, and then I didn't even put Mod Podge out over the top of it. I just put the Mod Podge underneath and then laid it down and smoothed it out. The tip I do have for you though is if you want to bridge a crease like this, do it in two pieces. So I cut the map in half and put half of it on this side, and then I did the second half over here. If you try to bridge that gap, a lot of times you'll get a buckling in there and it just looks kind of funny. So my tip is, you know, if you're going to bridge the fold in the page, do it in two pieces. Do one half for this and one half for this. But again, you know, I wasn't crazy about my watercolor, so I thought, well, I want to kind of cover that up. So I pulled out some paper and covered it up. Say you do a watercolor page and you absolutely hate it. It's just ugly. You're like, oh, what am I going to do now? Cover it up with a piece of paper. There is no reason, nothing that says, oh, I don't like kind of how that turned out. Find a piece of paper or a map or a book page and just cover it up. So there's no right or wrong to these journals. Really, the purpose of this is for you to create, for you to enjoy what you're creating. So that's what I said. If watercolor's not your jam, skip it. Collage your pages. Use tissue paper on your pages. You can hand draw on your pages. Like I said, there is no right or wrong. I happen to love watercolor. And the reason we put watercolor pages in here is because they will hold up to anything. You don't have to worry about how much water you use or different things like that. So that is everything I have to show you for today. We're going to talk about the next class here. So the next class is coming up on, let me grab my sheet here, on Monday, August 16th. So your homework for this class is to finish the backgrounds on your pages. However you choose to do it, just make sure that your pages are decorated. I will also have more scrapbook paper at the library, so you can grab scrapbook paper for your inside front and inside back cover if you want to go ahead and do those. Again, it's very similar to the cover. You just put the piece of paper down with some Mod Podge and then trim off the edge. But because this is a file folder, you will not be able to watercolor on the inside of your front and back cover. It just will not hold up to that. So you're going to need to pick some paper that you want to use for that. The pockets I will cover in the next class as to how those work and how, if you want to add pockets to your pages. Think about what you want to include as far as decorating your pages for the next class. We will have, let me grab my box of stuff here. Let's see. Okay, so we will have a bunch of stuff at the library. We will have some pearls you can use. We will have sequins you can use. We will have colored gems. We have all kinds of paper ephemera. Ephemera is just a fancy word to say, pieces of paper that you decorate with. I own a ton of punches, and this is what I call as my punch box. It has things like punched out flowers, punched out leaves, some suns that you can use. So I will have this box. It has butterflies. So there's all kinds of stuff in here that you guys can use. So just so you kind of have an idea. But if there's something special that you want to include in your journal, please bring that or have that ready for the next class. Otherwise, I think that is everything I have for you today. So I hope you had fun. I hope you enjoyed this process of creating the backgrounds for your book. Take your time, enjoy it, and like I said, if something doesn't work out, just cover it up. It's not a big deal. Like I said, this should be a fun process, and this should be a process of something that you enjoy doing. We don't want to make this a chore. So thank you all for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this. I had a lot of fun, and we will see you in the next class. Thanks. Bye-bye.